Hi guys, it's May from RehabU Movement and Performance Therapy. Welcome to the Pick My Brain segment of the blog. Today is episode 4. I'm with Joey Russo from Fast Strong Kinesiology, who is kind enough to serve as my model and help me demonstrate to you guys the amazing exercises we have to show you to answer your questions. I have one question today about elbow pain. But one thing I do want to mention, if you do have a question you want to ask me for the Pick My Brain segment, please DM me either via Instagram or Facebook, and I'll do my best to answer your question in one of the episodes of Pick My Brain. That said, there are questions that are answerable, and then there are questions that are quite a bit more difficult to answer. For example, I sometimes get people send me pictures, shirtless picture, and it says, my left shoulder is lower than my right. What do you think the problem is? So those are the kind of questions that, aside from, going through a full, thorough assessment, including history, all your history of activity, whether there's pain related to that posture, position, et cetera, the list goes on. It's not really something I can answer off the bat. Okay, first of all, it's sometimes normal to have one shoulder a little bit lower than the other, but either way, it would require a full assessment. So just be aware that some questions are answerable, like what do you think about XYZ, or I've got shoulder pain doing such and such movement. Do you think that I could modify using such and such exercise? Or those are the kind of questions that I can answer, or thoughts on kind of things. But how can I fix XYZ with very little information is a little complex to answer. All right, so that said, I do my best to answer the questions that I do get. So feel free to send, and if I do need just a little bit more information, I'll ask you, and then that may wind up in me being able to answer the question efficiently on the blog. Next question I had was from CrossFit Rayad Saint Lo. Inner elbow pain during rope climb or heavy one-arm dumbbell snatch. Do you have any thoughts on the issue? Like right off the top of my head, that sounds very much like medial epicondylitis or golfer's elbow, just from the mechanism of what's contributing to pain. Again, I'm not diagnosing with so little information, and I'm not diagnosing because I do not diagnose. But a lot of the times when you've got a lot of elbow and wrist flexion, you may repetitively, or very heavy load, or an increase in volume or intensity in a short period of time, you may wind up with an inflammatory condition such as medial epicondylitis. And climbing the rope, where you're pulling up in elbow flexion and wrist flexion, and heavy one-arm dumbbell snatches, where you wind up pulling on the dumbbell, sounds like the kind of mechanism that could lead to that. Okay, so with medial epicondylitis, depending on how long it's been around, there's obviously a treatment aspect to getting over the epicondylitis, where we want to stress the area, essentially jumpstart the inflammation, and then reload the tissue progressively. Probably the most important thing in anything that's tendinitis or tendinopathy is load management. So I would avoid the heavy rope climbs, and avoid the heavy one-arm dumbbell snatches for a certain time. I would avoid things that create a lot of pain. That said, you do need to start loading the tendons progressively. All right, so those flexor tendons of the forearm. One exercise that I give a lot, it's one of those exercises that has an analgesic effect and works the deep tendons of the forearm, the deep muscles of the forearms, are tendon gliding exercises. I'm gonna have Joey. So you need to have your elbow, so maybe you could lunge next to the table and then have your elbow up on the table. Yeah, there we go. So what we want is He's gonna get his arm down on the table. So with the tendon gliding he's gonna start here and he's gonna just bend the fingers into the hand. Now he's keeping the wrist neutral. And then once he's done that, he folds to get a nice closed fist in that order, and then releases in the same order. Open and open. Close at the top, close, open, open. So gliding of the tendons over here, and then nice flexion work of the tendons in through here. That's the first tendon gliding exercises. He could do 2 sets of 8. The second one, now he's gonna bend here, keeping the fingers straight. And then from there, he's trying to bring his fingers as far down into his palm as he can. There, so he doesn't end up with a closed fist like the first exercise, but over here, and then up and up. Now a lot of people here end up extending the wrist, so just make sure you keep it very neutral. Yeah. So you do this one for 8 repetitions as well. Okay. So when I give people solutions to treat themselves, which I often do, because they can do stuff themselves a lot more often than I can do manual therapy on them, I'll tell them to get into that tendon, get into that origin, get into that sticky spot, that painful spot, and friction, then do a nice stretch, and then go and do these tendon gliding exercises, okay, as part of their warm-up, okay? Now, the other aspect that will be really important, as I mentioned, for everything that's tendonitis, tendinopathy, is managing the load. So what do we tell people who have that elbow pain to change in their training to respect that pain, but still load the surrounding tissues and load the tendons so that they don't become too underloaded, okay? So how do we make sure that they continue to have strength in their continuum of care? Carries are really nice because we want to work grip. We just don't want to overwork the grip. So a lot of the time, some of the mechanisms, as I mentioned before, are having that elbow flexion and wrist flexion. So you certainly would have to do a lot of form check on different exercises, such as, am I flexing my wrists at the end of my pull-ups or ring rows or whatnot, and correcting those kind of things. You'd also want to remove the exercises where that is part of the movement, like the rope climb, like the one-arm heavy dumbbell snatch, because having that flexion is part of that movement. You have to do it, but right now it's too aggravating. And then how do you load the tendon? Everything that works grip will be interesting for this kind of condition. So carries in the least provocative position. So I would say, you know, certainly neutral grip usually is tolerated pretty well. Pronated grip might be a little bit less tolerated. So your deadlifting might need some adjustment as well. But doing farmer carries would be an interesting way to continue to load those tendons. So, you know, a quick answer to a loaded question where, you know, it requires a rehab plan involving load management. But, you know, at least if you can integrate that friction, the stretches, the tendon gliding exercises, and stay away from the provocative exercises for some time, but continue to work on grip in positions that are not painful, that will be a way to get rid of that issue or treat that issue. Another thing that I like to mention is that sometimes you can do stuff that triggers a little bit of pain, as long as within 24 to 48 hours, your pain returns to baseline, okay? So managing the load and then monitoring your symptoms is gonna be of utmost importance for this type of condition. So if you've modified your training to remove the offending activities like the rope climbs and the one-arm dumbbell snatches, but you've replaced those with heavy carries, You may still find that you're a little bit aggravated the day after you do a heavy carry, but as long as after 24 hours or maximum 48 hours, the pain has returned to baseline, we're okay. We haven't surpassed the capacity to load that tank. Okay, so monitoring load, monitoring what the symptoms are like, and going from there. So hopefully that helps a little bit. And stay tuned for the next episode of Pick My Brain.